Even though Bobby Fischer made his case as one of the best players of all time, there's one player he always struggled against. That is Mikhail Tal of the Soviet Union. Tal was a fierce attacker known to sacrifice all of his pieces in terms to get checkmate, and Tal liked chaos. While it's well known Fischer liked positions to be sterile, him having a minor or sufficient advantage to push all the way to the end while keeping everything controlled and his opponent's counterplay limited. In this video, I'll be taking a look at two excellent games played by Fischer and Tal, one when they're younger and Tal won, and one later on where Fischer managed to get the victory. Although it must be said that Tal finished his career with a winning record against Fischer, one of the only players ever to do so. Tal opens with d4, this is in the Zagreb candidates back in 1959. We see Fischer responds with his classical, going for the King's Indian, controlling a bit of the center from afar. So Tal playing it standard. If you go forward a few more moves, you see the variation that Tal decides to go for. He doesn't go into the mainline Mar del Plata with castling, where black can generate this massive kingside attack. Instead, he goes for this sort of more positional Petrosian variation with pushing the pawn immediately just to claim that space advantage and try and say you have a long-term advantage due to black just having less space and having a cramped position. See, Fischer just goes knight d to b7, a good move, trying to plant a knight on c5 and put pressure on this e4 pawn. Tal immediately responds by pinning that knight. Fischer decides to kick it away. The bishop retreats and Fischer goes a6. I wouldn't say this is a main move now. I think maybe you probably want to grab a bit more space, just pushing that pawn 2 squares instead. But I guess the idea of this move is to slow down White's queenside progress of b5, but I can't be quite sure as this is not a move I actually know. I don't think it's a move played recently. Tal decides to castle. Fischer rotates the queen over to the kingside, ready to start some sort of attack. And Tal continues. He just goes knight d2. Fischer goes knight h7, freeing up Freddy the f-pawn to push and march forward to begin his attack. But Tal, again, the battle lines have been drawn with this closed center. White is going to attack on the queen side and black is going to attack on the king side. So we see Tal immediately lurches forward, b4, trying to get some play, trying to basically rip open this queen side and try and get a pass pawn or win some significant material while still trying to defend himself on the king side. Fischer decides to trade off those dark square bishops, of course. This bishop, although it was a key defender of the center in the beginning, now it's not so useful as Tal is obviously declares intentions to not be attacking on the king side, so this trade would definitely benefit Fischer, getting one of his worst pieces out of the game. Of course, Tal does exchange that, trying to get rid of black's bishop and weaken the dark squares around his king. Fischer recaptured with a knight off the edge of the board. That knight was a little bit worse position, so I had to take with that one. And Tal decides to continue with knight to b3, again, continuing his queenside initiative. Fischer moves the queen again. So now we can see, even in terms of like a very basic, moving a piece multiple times, maybe there's more a middle game than the opening, but we can see Fischer sort of struggling to find an adequate plan here. Queen to d2 by Tal, and Fischer just rotates his king out of there, just to make sure there's no annoying checks on any of the diagonals. Tal again moves his queen again to eyeing up these juicy queenside squares, ready to start pushing. Knight's g8 by Fischer, again freeing up that f-pawn for a push. And Tal continues, just c5. The queen side is going to open up, and Fischer's got a lot of work to do if he wants to sort of maintain any sort of winning chances in this game. So f5 by Fischer, immediately striking back, probably the best move in the position. Tal captures, Fischer captures again. Normally these sort of captures are seen as a little bit more risky because now you really don't have anything contending in the center apart from this d5 pawn, which isn't doing too much in terms of cramping black because his pieces are rotating around differently. And of course, Fischer immediately threatening f4 with tempo on the queen and maybe just trying to start this kingside attack. So Tal has to respond accurately, and he does. He goes f4, immediately halting Fischer's advance. We see Fischer captures, then we see d takes c5. Fischer trying to clarify the situation on the queen side. We see no attacks really likely to break through here, and with Fischer's worst placed pieces, it's hard to see how he's going to stand a chance in this endgame if Tal plays this accurately. Tal decides to get the bishop into the game, making use of that weak king. He thought it'd be safer on h7. In fact, it's very vulnerable on h7. So Fischer really under a bit of pressure here. C takes b4, and then we see Tal brings his rook into the game, does not care the knight is hanging. Again, danger levels, the queen is hit, the knight is hit, the queen is worth more, it has to move. Queen to f6. Tal continues, rook to e6, harassing the queen. The queen's got to move again. Queen takes on c3, grabbing that knight, but Tal had seen this all before. He sees it at a bishop check, rook takes, queen takes with check. The king goes back. Even though Fischer's up 2 points of material, Tal's attack is very strong with these extremely well-placed heavy pieces. The artillery bearing down on black's king is going to be extremely hard for him to survive. Tal takes a little bit of a slower approach. He goes rook to f3, trying to get some sort of checkmate set up, maybe swinging the rook over. Also comes with a tempo on that queen, so the queen has to move away. We see rook to e8, infiltrating the back rank, and Tal goes knight to f6, just trying to gum it up, get these knights defended. But as you may know, these two knights defending each other is a bit of a flimsy structure. Luckily, that queen is lending a helping hand all the way over on b2, but it's hard to say that piece isn't just offside. We see Tal sacrifices his queen. Queen takes f6 check, but the knight is, of course, pinned. So, of course, after queen takes, you can just take with the rook. That knight isn't going anywhere. It's pinned. That is an illegal move. The king g7 by Tal, renewing the threat of knight takes f6 by Fischer, sorry. And then Tal doesn't give a crap. He's just going to go on the back rank saying, how the hell are you going to resolve this position with the bishop stuck on the back rank? I'm going to win that bishop or that rook. And material is actually, I'm up a pawn. So Tal's completely winning after this daring sacrifice. Fischer's forced to play a move like knight e7, and Tal just goes knight to a5, just trying to reroute that knight, make its way over to the king side and try and pressure these weak pawns because bishop and rook are in an absolute bind. We see h5 only really move. He's just so completely caught up. This knight has to stay here to defend that bishop. Fischer's in a bit of a tricky spot here. h4, completely shutting that down. Rook to b8, and we see Tal again going with his plan, going to rotate that knight over b5. The knight moves again to e6, and now that knight's just going to drop into c6. And Fischer's going to have absolutely no counterplay because after I move, like I'm not even sure what Tal would play here. I guess you don't really have any moves. Maybe something like h5 because everything again is so gummed up. You go knight to c6. If you decide to grab that knight, I would just take the bishop. The rook is hit, the knight is hit. If you trade, you're just down the exchange, and after you move that knight, I'll grab this pawn up in exchange in endgame. And with your pawns being so weak, this is not going to be a hard one for Tal to win. So Tal takes that game against young Bobby Fischer, proving himself one of the best players in the world at the time. Here we see jumping into game 2, Fischer at the absolute peak of his powers, Tal starting to decline as well as a sick man all his life. Fischer even visited in hospital one time when he was sick, just showing Fischer's respect for Tal as a chess player. Let's get straight into game 2. Fischer just has the white pieces. He decides to open with g3. Definitely a tricky move, perhaps showing his respect for Tal's theoretical knowledge. Tal decides to go g6. In this game, I have some notes from Fischer himself, so I'll be going through those as we look through the game. So Fischer decides to fianchetto his bishop. Tal does the exact same, and we see knight to f3, again getting another piece out. Tal decides to strike back with c5, a really good move in this position, still played to this day in fact. We see c3, knight to f6, castles, and Fischer finally stakes his claim in the center with the move d4. Fischer was saying the correct move for Tal would have actually been c takes d, and then d5 with a completely equal position, which was actually played in the same Blitz tournament by Smyslov against Fischer. Fischer mentions this endgame is simply better for white. After captures, black is forced to recapture beyond a pawn, so he takes. After queen takes, rook takes. Normally in these King's Indian style endgames with the exchange, black can only have a great fighting chance, but here, Fischer mentions that his bishop is just better placed, and the fact that black's bishop is just going to be biting on granite here into this pawn chain on c3 and b2, it's really hard to argue that this bishop is well placed at all. Fischer continues, targeting that weak pawn. Tal is forced to defend it. He chooses to defend it with the knight. Then we see knight to a3 by Fischer. Tal jumps his knight into the middle of the board, harassing the bishop. Fischer doesn't even care. He's going to give that up, getting the rook into the game. Bishop g4 by Tal again, playing very accurately, both of them in this endgame. Then bishop d2 by Fischer. He thinks, Tal, if you're not going to take that bishop, alright then, you've lost your chance. I'm going to move that bishop away. Now you're going to be forced to prove that you can actually survive this position. Here, Tal decides to play the interesting move h6. So stop white ever placing any sort of piece on g5 in order to harass that very weak f7 pawn. See h3 by Fischer, kicking that bishop away, almost following suit, mirroring Tal. Fischer here mentions that maybe knight b5 or rook to e1 would have been more exact, but this move works as well. Of course, everything's a move here. Bishop to e6. Then we see knight to b5 by Fischer, immediately trying to latch in, trying to sink his teeth into those weak dark squares all around here, only defended by this very precariously and dubiously placed knight on a6. The knight c to d7, trying to kick Fischer out. Fischer goes for a4, to solidify even his light squares on the queen's side. Bishop to b3, Fischer rotates the rook out of there, and after captures, knight has to move out of there. And we see bishop to e3 by Fischer again, latching onto this central control, again trying to put pressure on these weak pawns, and just grind Tal out in an endgame where him finding one of these unusual crazy sacrifices is probably not going to happen. They both decide to capture. Tal goes b6, trying to blunt the bishop. The bishop just captures on e7. Now the rook is hit. The rook has to move. This was just a blunder by Tal. Rook to e8, the bishop moves away, and now Tal is just down a pawn here. Both of them trying to bring some pieces into the game. Tal trying to start something on the queen side. It's just not going to happen. Fischer even mentions he has this powerful square on d4 for any piece he'd like. And even if anything captures, you have a lovely pawn chain and a passed pawn on d4. Of course, jumps the knight straight into there. Knight takes a3. Tal thinking, if I have the two bishops, maybe I stand a chance. That is normally a bit of an endgame advantage. But when you're down a pawn, it's hard to say it's really going to mean anything. Bishop f1 by Fischer, just trying to trade down into this winning endgame. Bishop back to d5. Again going for the trades. They don't repeat. Fischer decides to harass the bishop again. Forced into d3, b4, captures. Now this pawn is going to be a weakness. He's going to isolate and attack that for the rest of the game. Of course, defending, gets the bishop out of there, harasses it again, and now he's ganging up on that pawn. The other rook's going to be forced to defend. Tal decides to just give it up, trying to get some counterplay on this c3 pawn. Captures, rook captures, and then grabs that pawn on c3. Again, Tal is just down a pawn here, but in this king side, having a 4-on-3 normally isn't a winning advantage. But I think here, Fischer, with his pieces just being a little bit better placed, is still going to stand a good chance for a win. So see knight takes f5, Fischer grabs the bishop, now they're in this opposite colored bishop endgame, but now Tal's structure is absolutely ruined. Look at these pawns. He's got completely isolated and doubled pawns. These are going to be extremely easy to pick off if Fischer plays accurately. Bishop d5, again, pinning that weak f7 pawn. It's been a target almost all game. He's now capitalizing on it. Rook c7 by Tal trying to defend. Fischer moves the rook again to defend his bishop. A little bit of maneuvering here. Both players sort of shuffling their pieces around, trying to improve the position to the best of their ability. But now we see Tal has dropped that pawn on f7, capturing it. So Fischer decides to capture it. Can't give it up anymore because opposite colored bishop endgames favor the attacking side because this bishop, this dark squared one, cannot defend those light squares. We see rook to c7, bishop to f8. Again, more shuffling. And basically Fischer's just going to convert this very smoothly, make sure there's no counterplay. In this position, Mikhail Tal actually resigned the game because 4-on-2, even on the king side, is completely losing endgame. And these pawns have not gotten any stronger. In fact, they've only gotten weaker. So Tal was forced to resign. Fischer managed to get the game to his liking, a precise game with a stable advantage after a while, which he manages to convert into a great victory. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. I tried to include some of the story behind it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.